Mathematics is the language of God. God is mathematics. Language, mathematical language, is an intelligent, striving, purposeful, ontological substance. It alone explains why reality has two layers: intelligible and sensible, form and content. Reality is a dual-aspect mathematical monism. One aspect is intelligible form, syntax, and the other is sensible, emotional and mystical content, semantics. Science either completely disbelieves in form, or believes in it while maintaining we can't access it but can somehow approximate it, to an incredible degree of accuracy, with unreal mathematics. Science believes only in lifeless, mindless matter and claims that life, mind, intelligence, reason, logic, the unconscious, consciousness, subjectivity, feelings and mysticism all come from inert matter, by some miracle of what matter is and how it is organized by its form, which may or may not be a real thing, in the weird scientific view. It's no wonder science has made no progress in producing a final theory of everything. It has no clue what it is doing. It has no clue what it is aiming for. Should we be surprised? Of course not, because science is all about randomness, chance, accident, the meaningless, the purposeless, the pointless, the goalless. So how could science ever arrive at a final goal? It's ideologically and dogmatically forbidden by science. S.E. Frost Jr. wrote, "The realists taught that ideas or forms are real things existing independently of whether or not they ever come in contact with matter. In each instance, the idea or form could exist without matter. In ontological mathematics, universals, forms, are eternal and necessary. They have no dependence on anything else, insofar as they are uncaused and uncreated. However, they inevitably and compulsorily give rise to matter, space and time, i.e., to temporal and contingent things. It's all dynamically built into the math. Matter cannot exist without form, but form can exist without matter. The domain of being, the eternal and necessary domain, is always free of matter. It's pure mind. The domain of becoming, the temporal and contingent domain, is always material. The domain of becoming is an endlessly repeating material unit within the mental container of eternity and necessity. A Big Bang starts a universe of becoming, and a Big Crunch ends it and begins the next universe by triggering the next Big Bang. Infinite universes of material becoming, occurring in strict succession, one after the other without any gaps, fit into the eternal and necessary order of mental being. Just think of a sinusoidal wave, the basis of existence. It goes on forever, and yet it has a defined period, which it repeats endlessly. So it is with universes. Each universe is a period of the collective wave function. The wave function is infinitely complex, so each universe is unique. There is no recurrence of identical universes. Existence can never run out of new things to explore. Plato talked of freestanding metaphysical forms, such as the form of the good, the form of justice, the form of beauty, the form of life, the form of human, and so on. This isn't how universals, forms, actually work. All universals belong to the holistic system of ontological mathematics. They don't stand on their own. They are tautological, i.e., each implies the next. It's impossible to get any Gödelian or Cantorian universal that is outside the system, i.e., a universal that can be constructed from the system of universals and yet stand outside that system as an exception, an anomaly, something whose truth cannot be proved within the terms of the system. Tautological, circular, holism renders any such non-tautological, linear, exceptions impossible. Gödel's incompleteness theorems are totally destroyed by circularity, holism and tautology. His theorems rely on linear, parts-based, non-tautologous arguments, but all of these are ontologically invalid. Gödel's incompleteness theorems are relevant only to man-made, abstract, unreal mathematics. They have nothing to do with real mathematics, ontological mathematics. Plato's hierarchy of metaphysical forms must be replaced by interlinked, systematized mathematical forms. These cause all particular things in the temporal and contingent world. S.E. Frost Jr. wrote, "But there arose a thinker who dared to fling himself in the teeth of all this tradition and to declare that these ideas or forms, these universals, as they were called, were mere names and had no reality." His name was Roscelin. He taught that the only real things are the individual objects in the universe. Each individual man exists, but the universal, mankind, does not exist at all. It is merely a name for a collection of men. Roscelin was in many ways the grandfather of modern science and postmodernism. The attack on universals has proved catastrophic for humanity's intellectual development. A straight line can be drawn from Roscelin to Nietzsche. Nietzsche's "God is dead" proclamation is just another way of saying that universals do not exist, hence nothing anchors the world of particular things. Nietzsche may have been an electrifying philosopher of the human condition, but he's the last guy you would go to if you want rational and logical knowledge of ultimate reality. Nietzsche, when he killed God, killed the possibility of ultimate knowledge because God is just another name for absolute knowledge, absolute truth, an absolute anchor for existence. Nietzsche, like Einstein, abolished the ether, and was a relativist, albeit a bizarre relativist who committed himself to the crazy idea of eternal recurrence, the exact repetition of this universe forever. Universalists always have an ether, an absolute stage, against which everything else is relative. Particularists never have an ether, and so everything is relative to everything else and there is no absolute truth, no God. Roscelin was simply wrong that mankind is just a name. In fact, every particular human being requires the DNA associated with the human species, and not with any other species. All humans share commonality of DNA. The human universal is encoded in human DNA. No one can be a human if their particular DNA does not conform to the species DNA of humans, the universal of humans. A cat has cat DNA, not human DNA. The human universal is present in human DNA. It's what makes each human a human, and not, for example, a cat. It is shared by all humans and could in a sense be extracted from humankind and expressed as a platonic form of human life, standing above all particular humans. Each individual human must express this platonic form of human in order to be human. S.E. Frost Jr. wrote, "You can easily see that Roscelin and the great philosophical tradition were directly opposed to each other. The result was a long and bitter dispute between the realists, or those who believed that universals were real, and the nominalists, who taught that universals were mere names and had no real existence. This dispute was very important since it was a fight over the question as to whether the things of nature, the objects of the universe, are real or merely copies of real things. It was an attempt to answer the question, what is real, the world which we can experience with our senses or the world which we think with our minds? This question is indeed the decisive one. Is the real world the sensible one of matter, physics, or the intelligible one of mind, metaphysics, ontological mathematics? Nominalists truly only believe in sensory particulars. Universalists know that unobservable things exist and determine all observable things. S.E. Frost Jr. wrote, Anselm was on the side of the realists. He believed that these reals, ideas or forms, existed independently of any individual object. He taught that universals or general concepts were ideas or forms having a separate existence and, in some way, the things which mold matter into individual objects which we see and experience through our senses. Anselm, author of the brilliant ontological argument, seeking to prove the existence of God simply by way of conceptual definitions, and not requiring God to be in any way empirical and observable, was exactly right. The universals mold the particulars. Mathematical form molds all scientific, material, particulars. St. Thomas Aquinas held that all universals existed in the mind of God. In fact, the universals are the mind of God. God is the frequency singularity, the collection of all monadic minds, and the author, the creator, of all things via its countless nodes. You can never understand God if you do not understand that God is a hive mind. God is definitely not an individual theistic superbeing, responsible for everything else. S. E. Frost Jr. wrote, "Among the scholastics, Catholic philosophers, were two groups known as the realists and the nominalists. The realists held that the whole was the only real thing, and that the parts, the units, were not truly real. The nominalists held that the parts, the units, were the real things, and the whole merely a name." Hegel was a realist. His philosophy was all about the whole and how the whole had to be understood before any parts could be understood. Scientists believe that parts can be understood without the whole, even presuming the whole to actually exist. When scientists think of the whole, they are really thinking of the collection of all particulars. They are not thinking of holism, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and in fact contained in every part. Aristotle said, "What is the reason for a unity, oneness? For however many things have a plurality of parts and are not merely a complete aggregate but instead some kind of a whole beyond its parts, there is some cause of it, since even in bodies, for some the fact that there is contact is the cause of a unity, oneness, while for others there is viscosity or some other characteristic of this sort." But a definition, which is an explanation, is one thing, not because it is bound together but because it is a definition of a single thing. The whole is not a bunch of disparate parts without any underlying binding connection. The whole is a single thing, which necessarily binds together all of its parts, and transcends them. The whole is a system of transcendence and immanence, a panentheism, meaning that all is in God, God and the world are interrelated with the world being in God and God being in the world. God is the immanent world, as well as transcending it. Hegel's philosophy is panentheistic. Ontological mathematics is panentheistic. God, the supreme universal, explains the immanent world, and is both inside the world and outside it, transcending it. The immaterial singularity of being is the transcendent God. The material spacetime world of becoming is the immanent God. In ontological Fourier mathematics, the core of the frequency singularity is pure being, pure transcendence, but from it is constructed the spacetime universe, the immanent universe of matter. The transcendent and the immanent are wholly bound together. The whole is most certainly greater than the sum of its parts. In science, where there is no transcendence and no fundamental unity, such a unity literally requires transcendent holism. The whole is simply the sum of its parts, unless the miracle of emergentism takes place. Science, for example, explains consciousness as an emergent property of the material brain. So, even science recognizes that something can transcend the mere collection of parts. For emergentism to be rendered more than a religious miracle, it would have to be cast in intelligible terms, which is to say, in terms of underlying universals. But these are unobservables, hence not part of science. Emergentism is unscientific since nothing, emergent, can be predicted. There is no system that explains emergentism. There is no way of scientifically observing emergentism occurring. Rather, it is an after-the-fact rationalization. So, no scientist can explain how lifeless, mindless atoms in a human brain can explain human consciousness, so they simply assert that they do, i.e., they say, "We know that consciousness exists and that it exists in the brain, but we can find no means to account for this, so we shall boldly declare that it emerges from the brain, that it is an emergent property of matter and how matter is organized." It's not as if it can say anything else. Science only has three tools in its toolbox: matter, the laws of matter, and how those laws organize matter within itself and with regard to external matter. 100% of scientific explanations have to be cast in these terms, which make no reference at all to life, mind, the unconscious, consciousness, free will, subjectivity, and yet are required to fully explain all of these. Science doesn't even have a symbol for mind, so how could mind ever emerge from any scientific equation, except by way of a staggering anomaly, which is to say a miracle, an emergent miracle? Science relentlessly mocks religious miracles, while gleefully relying on emergent miracles. Scientists are such a funny lot, so irrational. In ontological mathematics, it's essential for all of mathematics to be present in every part of mathematics, i.e., every part of mathematics implies every other part, meaning that this is a system of total tautology. Every mathematical statement contains the whole of mathematics, since no statement can be validly made that does not implicitly reflect the entire structure of mathematics, which is responsible for any particular statement of mathematics. It is impossible for ontological mathematics not to be complete and consistent. Every truth of the system is formally provable. Ontological mathematics is the apex of tautology, coherence and holism, which are all basically synonymous terms. S. E. Frost Jr. wrote, John Scotus Erigena was a realist. He conceived of the universal, the whole, existing prior to the individual thing. This is exactly right. The mental whole must exist prior to any material parts. The dreamer must exist before the dream. In Hegelian philosophy, God in himself, the transcendent absolute idea, must exist before God can externalize itself as the immanent material universe and then produce the spirit that will evolve into the absolute spirit and gain absolute knowledge of the absolute idea, thus completing the circle and bringing the absolute idea to the fullest awareness of itself, from both the inside and outside perspectives. The absolute idea must, via the world, alienate itself from itself in order to see itself from outside. Science, perverse and irrational as always, says that the spacetime universe of particular material things can literally randomly emerge from non-existence and needs no holistic universal to precede it. As ever, science rejects universals, no matter how essential they are to rational coherence and the avoidance of scientific miracles such as randomly extracting existence from non-existence. Science always takes the side of content against form, particulars against universals, parts against wholes. It always rejects reason and logic in favor of sensory objects. S. E. Frost Jr. wrote, Anselm devoted much time and thought to proving that universals were prior to individuals. No scientist would ever spend even 1 second on such an exercise. That's science's whole problem. It would never rationally work out that universalist mathematics must precede particularist science, and furnish all intelligible form present in the scientific universe. S. E. Frost Jr. wrote, Roscelin, the founder of nominalism, applied the doctrine of nominalism to the Trinity. He argued that single things were the only realities and that universals, or general concepts, were mere names or words. Consequently, he held that there could be no reality corresponding to the name God. But there are only 3 different substances or persons equal in power. Thus, for him, the Trinity is not 1 in 3, but as 3 distinct beings. Roscelin was a heretic. He did not believe in Christian monotheism, but in a pagan triad of gods. Nominalism always separates a thinker from the unity, holism and completeness provided by universalism.